All right, it's the Block Party DFS show. You guys know the drill. Every Friday, we walk through the GPP slate with JM to Win, but JM to Win is traveling. He was downgraded to out, but we have the perfect substitute. It is Hilow from 1 Week Season. He'll be joining us to walk through this slate from a GPP perspective. We'll do a high-level overview of what we're looking at. We'll go position by position, and we'll still play the hits and build a DraftKings lineup. It's the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crack spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right. We got Hilow. You're battling through the elements. JM's traveling. 1 Week Season. You guys are just warriors in week 11.
Oh, yeah, dude. You know how we do it. No rest for the wicked, man. We're always in them streets.
I know. I feel bad asking you to sub, knowing you have multiple other shows this week. You've been under the weather, but you were game for this, so I appreciate it.
Heck yeah, dude. I appreciate you having me on. It's always a blast chatting with you.
The chat does want to know, JM, normally he has some kind of sartorial flair to him, yoga pants, a fancy sweatshirt. Do you have anything that can match JM's game here?
Dude, we might have to take a mid-show intermission for me to go get something fun on. Yeah, I showed up just all plain, and I'm just trying not to cough into the microphone right now. So my mind was kind of just on that.
It's all good. It's all good. Well, we are going to, if you love turning into the show every week, you're going to like today's edition just as much. Hilow, super, super sharp guy, does a ton of content all over the industry, a lot of stuff over at 1 Week Season. We drafted a best ball team this summer, had a lot of fun picking your brain about best ball game theory. I mean, this is a DFS show, but how is your best ball year going so far?
Dude, I have tried not to look at it because my my first 3 week advance rate was 50-60%, something so stupid, and then I saw it just drop just precipitously after that, and it's I know all these injuries that are going on. I just don't even want to look at it right now.
I know it's so brutal. We were talking about it on Ship Chasing last night that if you are going to look at advance rates, this off season, it's mid-round QB is just going to look like a disaster because every mid-round QB has gotten hurt. It's I think we're just going to have to throw that completely out.
That's kind of my issue to begin with, just talking purely about advance rates, because there's so many other pieces that go into it. I know it's a DFS show, but while we're here.
No, I asked.
There's a lot of noise that kind of goes into that metric. So it's going to be interesting discussion this offseason when we start trying to piece together what the hell happened this year.
For sure. We won't get bogged down in too much best ball talk. I'm sure Hilow and I will sync up for some best ball shows this coming off season, but let's dive in. Normally what we first do, quick recap of last week. It's always hard for me to even remember what happened. We had Dak go off again. We had that Chargers and Lions game go off. I was heavy on Commanders Seahawks, which was fine, but just not tournament winning upside there. How did your week 10 go?
I had my first real sweat of the season. I played 2 lineups in the 555 milli. I did a San Francisco Brock Purdy double as an anchor on one, and then a Dak Prescott double as an anchor on the other. And I was up to 19th at one point with 2 minutes remaining and fell to 50th overall. So, I mean, it was a legit, an awesome sweat for the first time this year.
Yeah, that was the contest. I think we highlighted that on the Monday show, that short gamer TV one with the Cowboys and the Texans block, right?
Yeah, and he did it without Brandon Cooks in the Dallas double too, which was interesting.
Yeah, that was a super sharp lineup. I should have gotten a bullet in there. Do you know, are they going to run any more of those 555 millis?
Yeah, they typically alternate. I think it's a 555, then the following week it's the big 4,444, and then they go back to the 555. It's every other week.
What is your kind of general contest selection? Are you like JM where you're doing some MME, some, high stakes single entry type stuff?
It's been a little bit all over the map. I'm a single entry 3-max guy by trade. I just think that the edge from a game theorist is heaviest in that format. But this year, I saw what JM was doing with his transition to MME. Tried to get in them streets. I went 3 straight weeks with maxing the milli. And two of those weeks were absolutely garbage atrocious. So it was like a net loss over 3 week span of like $7,000. So I was
Yeah.
like, all right, it's time to reassess. So we came back to the smaller field contest. I will take shots in the 444, 4,000, whatever milli. I will take shots in the 555, but primarily medium to high stakes, small field stuff is kind of where I make my bread and butter.
One thing I like to ask Jam, and I assume you maybe have some thoughts on it too. Are there any like metas that have emerged with the DFS landscape this year, or things that feel new to you, or maybe a little different than in previous years?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about this at 1 week season, and it was a we'll just call it a hypothesis of mine coming into the year, and that was the kind of state of projections and sims and how that interacts with the sport of DFS moving forward. And I think based on kind of a very small sample size of half of a season plus, I think we are moving towards like an equilibrium state at running back, because it's the
Mm.
most projectable position. It's the position where the highest degree of correlation can be drawn to volume. Um, and I think with these like simulators being able to run 1,000 infinite whatever simulations on a slate, I think with projections now being, having a significant sample size to be back tested, because like projection systems are projecting median outcome, which by definition means that like half the time the result is going to be below that projection and half the time it's going to be above it. And so you can back test these systems and these algorithms and see like how close you're getting to that perfect 50% split over under. And so these projection systems are kind of now getting to a sample size where that can mean something as far as like hit rate and consistency goes. So kind of all that leads us into like this season where we're seeing a fairly high hit rate amongst chalk at running back. And I think it is more a like telling signal than this is just variance. Like I think we're seriously approaching a state of we're not ever going to hit exact equilibrium because there's so much variance, but like we're approaching a state of like less fragility in the projections at running back.
Yeah, not to mention you look at Utical's winning millionaire maker lineup the other week, and he had a chalky Bijan Robinson who flopped in that matchup,
Yeah.
and it still like didn't matter because he pulled the other levers at those pass catchers. But yeah, when I've been reviewing lineups on Mondays, I've noticed that a lot too, where it's like, oh, a really unique stack, a really unique one-off wide receiver pivot, and then it's just like chalk running back, chalk running back, chalk running back. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure there's a few examples, but we haven't seen a ton of like off the board running back plays really hit this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the other kind of macro point I think in like the theoretics behind DFS this year is like overstacks gain importance because scoring is down around the league this year. I mean, you look at the 2020 season, that was kind of the peak year for scoring. NFL teams were averaging 2.88 touchdowns per game that season. That was down to 2.43 touchdowns per team per game in the 2022 season. And this year we're down below 2.30 touchdowns per team per game. So like we're obviously in this like decreased trend of scoring, which the league is playing too high at like a 60% rate. We know like kind of what that does to suppress splash plays and all that kind of goes into it. But like, how do we like formulate a game plan to attack this like changing environment? And I think it's moving away. The meta is moving away from like your standard DFS like stack or core of like a quarterback plus pass catcher plus a correlated bring back, which was kind of like at prominence when scoring was up because you had more shots on goal to be able to find those pieces. Now, like game overstacks, and we've seen it 3 out of the first 10 weeks this year already. Game overstacks have shipped large field contests. Those gain importance because it's much more unlikely that another game environment kind of matches something that like vastly overperforms expectations. On the opposite side of that, like skinny stacks are much more viable this year. And we've kind of seen like every week where a game overstack hasn't won, it's been this like quarterback plus one other player type roster that wins tournaments. So I think we're kind of like, we're in this like weird transitional period where scoring is down, and how do we like maximize our process against that? And I think it's overstacks and skinny correlations.
Yeah, and it's tough. I've been thinking about that overstacking stuff a lot. And Jam was actually talking about this on the Angles pod this week too, where there's a temptation. And I certainly fall into this, where it's like you do all this research and you fall in love with some of these plays. And you're like, I'd love to get this one in here. I'd love to get this one in here.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you have this fucking hodgepodge lineup that you need to get so many things right to win. And really fighting against that is something that takes like, purposeful intention to do.
Yeah, for sure. We've had a lot of discussions about the user base over at 1 Week Season this year. Questions coming in like, how do I keep my player pool narrow? How wide is too wide to go? Is it beneficial to like keep it so narrow? There's different competing like ideologies and methodologies within that, but like we're kind of the mind that the more narrow you can get a player pool, you can start like getting a core as narrow as possible is most beneficial, because when you get that core right, now you have less things that need to go right around it to kind of have you leap to the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is just like you have to fight off your own boredom of this same core, right? You get bored. It's like I do these underdog drafts, and it's like, man, how many times am I going to take Sam Laporta in these drafts this week? And it's like, no, like that's my stand. That's my tight player pool. I want to build around that if it hits, where it's like, no, now I'll just start taking these random other guys because I'm bored. So it is funny how that works if you're getting a lot of volume down. All right, let's go a little macro on this slate. I think a very fun slate. We have some highs, we have some lows, like historically low, again with a 33-point total. Got some nice totals up here though. Lions 48, Houston Cardinals 48, Dolphins 46.5. And then even the Seattle Rams game at 46.5. What's kind of your high level overview of this week 11 slate?
The high level like viewpoint is that the median game total is lower than it was last week. And I think that's important because we at 1 Week Season, we were kind of talking last week about, hey, we're probably going to need more than 230, the low 230s to ship GPPs this week, because we're expecting just more points to be scored around the league. Now we're kind of in this very similar like state of the slate as we had 2 weeks ago when Yuta shipped the Millie with his overstack. So we're kind of in this, like we're expecting scoring to kind of be downrange again, which again is going to influence kind of how we're looking to approach and construct rosters.
Yeah. Are there, with that kind of, skinny stack versus overstack versus this kind of falling in between of these past two previous slates, do you have, I know there's so many contextual things, but do you kind of have a lean? Are there a few game environments you want to overstack, or do you want to be more choosy with your spots?
Yeah, I think in that kind of contextualized discussion of like the macro state of the NFL right now, I think like game stacks are also losing importance for us in DFS, and we're a little bit more concerned with what teams can overperform. And there's like two on the slate that really just leaps and bounds jump out to me, and that's the 49ers against an extreme pass funnel matchup against the Buccaneers, and then the Houston Texans, which a lot of the emphasis in that game is being placed from an ownership level onto the Cardinals, which is kind of funny to me. But yeah, those are the two spots where I'm really, really looking at hammering this week.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point too. And like you even see in that lineup that won last week, the short gamer one, he had that secondary stack that was like a leveraged Texans block with Singletary, Noah Brown in the defense. And it was specifically kind of leveraged against that fragile Bengals chalk there. And again, he wasn't playing that as a game stack or anything. It was like, I am playing this side of the spectrum. And I think, again, going back to the traps we all fall into, and I know I fall into them myself, like the mini correlations and the bringbacks, they feel comfortable, but you're actually having to get two things right in that scenario, where if you're just betting on one team to do well, you're essentially reducing the number of things you have to get right.
Yeah, and that was super sharp last week too with the Houston Texans, because they were missing Dameon Pierce, they were missing Nico Collins, and if we expected them to succeed, the paths for that success just got lessened. So we expected success from the offense and a more concentrated unit, which is a very good setup. And we're kind of getting the same thing this week because Dameon Pierce looks like he's going to be out, and Noah Brown has already been ruled out.
Let's use this to transition into quarterback here. You mentioned the two games that we're going to see. It looks like the most popular quarterbacks. It seems like Kyler is trending to be the most popular on the slate, followed by Brock Purdy. But overall, it seems pretty spread out as far as ownership. We don't have a lot of the, mega elite guys. And then you got Josh Allen, our cover boy. I'm sure you got some thoughts on him, but what is your thoughts on quarterback here in week 11?
Yeah, I think it's extremely spread out because nobody really jumps off the page. So I think what we need to be doing, I think from a theoretical sense, when there's really like no clear and away top game environment or top spot for a given team, is kind of place hedged bets and leveraged bets on places that could overperform. So the reason that Josh Allen, I threw him on the cover for this week is there's a ton of ambiguity and uncertainty with that offense. They're in a difficult spot. They just fired their offensive coordinator, and people are probably not going to go there, specifically speaking to like the upper echelon in quarterback pricing, because we don't have what I call projectable value really on the slate. And that's like the players that are priced below like 5K that have a solid median projection. Because what that does is it influences how the field is going to build their rosters. If we have this like projectable value, it's like, okay, I can open up this salary and spend it elsewhere. That's when you see like top end, upper echelon quarterbacks be highly owned. That's where you see like your CMCs and your Austin Ekelers be highly owned, because you feel like it's okay and it's comfortable to allocate that much salary to one or two spots. We don't really have that this week. So now those players are not expected to garner a ton of ownership. And anytime I can get like a guy like Josh Allen, who up until last week was the most consistent quarterback in the NFL, at low ownership, I'm going to be looking to dive into that. So I think he's very interesting in a perceived tough matchup. But we kind of know what to expect from the Bills and from Josh Allen. If Josh Allen now, because of the change at offensive coordinator, is allowed to like be more mobile, or if he's allowed to attack more aggressively downfield instead of like being handcuffed to dump off so he doesn't have to take a hit. Like if they unlock him, that is something that could be like game changing on a slate like this, where you're just upside is going to be hard to come by.
Yeah, and I think everyone agrees or should agree that, Josh Allen still has the highest ceiling on the slate for quarterbacks. I think another guy who would maybe be in that conversation that we haven't seen in a while is Justin Fields. He's, much cheaper than Josh Allen at 6,900. What's your thoughts in Fields' return here against the Lions?
Yeah, I mean, Justin Fields is just going to be that guy. We know what to expect. He has like one of the I don't want to say lowest floors because he does have rushing upside, but like he has a very, very low floor when things don't go right, but he also has an elite ceiling when things do go right. And how we've seen things do go right with the Bears this year has primarily been through DJ Moore and Cole Kmet. We also have like all this uncertainty with the running back room in Chicago. Very, very difficult matchup on the ground against Detroit. So yeah, I mean, I think Fields definitely is in the conversation as one of the higher upside plays on the slate.
The other kind of interesting dynamic at quarterback, because I think there's a couple parallels between Tua and Dak, both teams favored to win by a lot, both priced similarly, 7,700, 7,300, and also both going against defenses that are probably easier to beat on the ground than through the air. So what is your thought on Tua and Dak? I don't think either are going to be too popular.
Yeah, this was one of the biggest leverage points for me last week, was taking that stance on Dak doubles, because we expected the Cowboys to succeed, but the field was telling us with a high degree of certainty that the success was going to come through either and or I guess their defense or Tony Pollard. And if we look at like their recent tendencies since their week 7 bye, it's like we're just going to try and win games and score points instead of like running the football so we can hashtag rest our defense. Like, okay, man, let's see, how did that work out for you for the first 6 weeks of the season? Now, like Mike McCarthy is kind of, and I think the most telling thing as far as Mike McCarthy and that whole discussion of like what to expect from the Cowboys moving forward is the fact that 2 weeks ago, last week. Yeah, last week. Dak left at the start of the fourth quarter. They took possession on a punt at the end of the third quarter. They were taking the first snap of the fourth quarter on offense. Dak and the rest of the starters came off the field. But who stayed on? CeeDee Lamb, because he was 4 yards short of 150 receiving yards. What did they do? They kept him on the field for 2 plays. They called both of them short outs to CeeDee Lamb to get him 4 receiving yards. He got 5 and ended up at 151 receiving. So that tells me that like Mike McCarthy is actually like, hey, I care about you guys. I care about your stats. He's telling the media that he still doesn't give a shit. But what we're seeing is like, that was kind of telling to me that like Mike McCarthy kind of flipped a switch during their bye. And that's awesome because they did not look that good before the bye.
So how are you handling that? And obviously we'll spend more time on running back in a few minutes, but how are you handling that vis-a-vis this being just an awesome, awesome running spot too?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on ownership. I think for me, like last week, we saw the field all over Tony Pollard. We've seen the inefficiencies. But if like the matchup very clearly tilts to the ground in both of those spots, if the field is going to be shy about Devon Chan or Raheem Mostert because there's uncertainties about the workload split, or if the field is going to be shy about Tony Pollard because he has vastly underperformed this season, that is the time when you want to like make that bet because the matchup is there. We know these guys are talented. And that's what's like, if the field is going to express certainty one way, but the advanced metrics are clearly pointing in another, that's when you kind of jump on a play like that, regardless of how they've performed in the past. But if Tony Pollard gets ownership, it's like, okay, well, I can just bet on the Dallas pass game winning again. If they're going to very clearly like just continue to focus and target CeeDee Lamb like a madman. I mean, 44 targets in 3 games is ridiculous. So I don't know. It's going to come down to ownership, I think.
Does Dak like, and I completely agree about the ownership thing. Do you have a lean on, do you feel like Dak is more of like a skinny stack with Lamb this week or kind of toss in Ferguson, let's onslaught this kind of thing?
Yeah, it's hard to downplay like Jake Ferguson's red zone role. I mean, he has almost a 30% red zone target share, which was who I doubled it with last week. Obviously, that did not return, but the matchup against a very, very zone heavy Panthers defense, it is theoretically going to suppress downfield work. So guys like Michael Gallup, guys like Brandon Cooks lose a little bit of luster. So like on paper, if you're going there, like it's just CeeDee Lamb and it's Jake Ferguson. I don't know if they're going to garner much ownership, but that's where I would go if going to the pass game.
So you mentioned some interest in the 49ers and Texans. I assume that funnels over to some interest in Brock Purdy and CJ Stroud.
Yes. Yeah. I have not looked at ownership. I heard you say that Brock Purdy was expected to be heavily owned on the slate.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing from a couple different ownership sources. Kyler, though, looking like he'll be the most popular at 6,100.
Which is hilarious to me. There's so much uncertainty with that offense right now, that team right now, that like on paper, the best spot is tight end. Whatever the hell his name. Yeah. Trey McBride. Yeah. But to be like third, I think he's going to be like 30, maybe 35% owned in like large field stuff. That becomes very interesting to me to express that degree of certainty with so much uncertainty surrounding this offense. What we do know is the Cardinals are not going to like keel over and die. That's what they told us last week. They gave up the top overall pick in the 2024 draft because they're trying to figure out like what the identity of this team is moving forward. They have a first-year head coach. They have all these kind of changing pieces, and they have new GM, all this stuff. So like they are using, I think, the end of this season to be like, this is an extended preseason for next year. We're going to figure out what's going on. And if that's the case, it's not so much good for the Cardinals because they still are not a good football team. It's a good for who they're playing on a given week if they're not just going to keel over and die. That just happens to be the Houston Texans, who are coming in with, I think, going to be much lower ownership than the Cardinals are going to see.
Yeah. I assume under 6K, Brock is your favorite quarterback. Are there any other cheapies in there? I see someone in the chat mentioning Jordan Love, who actually has a pretty good matchup. Anything else down there that you would entertain?
Not really. And the reason is I think these guys are going to be a little bit just based on like the macro state of the slate. I think they're going to be a little bit more attention paid to them. I don't know. I could be off on that. That's kind of my read right now, though.
Yep, that makes sense. Yes, Zach, Jam looks different this week. We got Hilow from 1 week season, which reminds me you can still get 50% off your 1 week season subs here, the Inner Circle, the DFS subs with promo code Pete50. Pete50 gets you 50% off. Hilow does a ton of great work over there. I always enjoy reading your restrictive chalk piece too, to kind of understand, the different directions people are heading. Let the people know what other regular content stuff you guys have up there. I know you do the DFS interpretations, but let people know.
Yeah, I mean, I do about half of the edge write-ups, so the game breakdowns. The other half really done by Michael Johnson, and then the late week stuff is where we really hammer and kind of separate ourselves from any of the other places around the industry, because we are much more focused on the kind of coming together of theoretics with analytics and then conceptual stuff. We're not just like throwing numbers at you and say, hey, go make decisions. We're kind of teaching how to make plus EV decisions when you're building a roster. So the late week stuff, you got my end around, which is the game theory stuff. You have late slate only content. You've got MME focused stuff. You've got single entry focused stuff. And it's more about like, how do we bring this slate together as a whole instead of just like looking at individual plays.
For sure. And just because Jam's not on here, I know he's going to have his full normal suite of content up this week. I think just some of the stuff got pushed around, but you can get access to that as always over at 1 week season. The scroll is a mandatory read for me before building lineups. Pete50 gets you 50% off that rest of season sub. Hilow, let's move over to running back now. I see a little chatter about Devin Singletary in the chat right now, coming off of a 30-touch game. Does look like he's going to be very popular. We actually have a pretty good slate for running backs. You got CMC, you got Ekeler. What do you think kind of overall about the running back position this week?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ownership is probably going to flow to this like sub 7K tier. I mean, you've got Monster, you've got Josh Jacobs, who's popping in basically any of the optimizers you're going to use this week as an insane volume play. You've got Tony Pollard there at 6,600, Dave Montgomery, Devon A. Chan, Breece Hall's probably going to get some traction. So this, like, when it becomes very clear about like how the pieces fit together on a slate, which is more important than individual ownership, just real quick, because it, like, when you're talking about comparing individual ownership, you're basically in the realm of pivots, which is like, I'm betting this player will outperform this player. And while beneficial and good to like be on the right side of that, it doesn't really do a whole ton for the rest of your roster, because the rest of your roster is kind of built similarly to a lot of the field. So one of the things I do in the end around at the end of the week is I look at like the chalk and how those pieces fit together on a roster. And what is that telling us that the field is seeing from a given slate? And from there, like, you can look to attack the slate through roster constructions that are kind of different than we expect the field to be using. And what that does is it just like decreases your, decreases the teams that you need to be on your path to first place, because that's really what it matters. That's the only thing that matters. If you ain't first, you're last. You need to ship a tournament to kind of make your season, your career, whatever the case. So because like I expect a lot of the emphasis to be placed on this mid-range and running back, guys like CMC, guys like Austin Ekeler, and then guys like at the kind of nebulous range, above 7K, but below the elites. So like Travis Etienne, Saquon Barkley start to become a little bit more interesting. Not like, I'm not speaking to the plays themselves, but just like how the pieces kind of fit together. So probably the top on paper play in that discussion is Austin Ekeler. I mean, you look at the state of this Chargers team, it's like 53% of their total opportunities last week went to Austin Ekeler and Keenan Allen. It's like, because they have Jalen Guyton, who is a field stretcher, does not command targets. They have Quentin Johnston, who does not command targets. He's not being really utilized to maximize his talents. You have an aging Gerald Everett, who's like in this between the 20s role. He's subbed out for like Donald Parham in the red zone because he's 18 feet tall and he just can high point a football, but he can't do like the other like NFL tight end shit, right? It's like, who do they have outside of these two guys? It's like, for the rest of the season, I just expect like 50 to 60, maybe even in some games, like 70% of the total offensive production to flow through Austin Ekeler and Keenan Allen. Now the matchup with the Packers and their zone heavy defensive scheme, it just very naturally funnels production to the middle of the field and to running backs through the air. So Austin Eckler's seen 7 or more targets in each of the last 3 games, has a path to double-digit looks on this slate against this opponent. So he's very clear in a way the top option at the position. But again, because there's a lack of like projectable value, he becomes hard to play because he's 8,600. So, but yeah, he's very, very interesting to me just on the top level discussion at running back here.
I see some chatter about Devon Achane in the chat. He is expected back. What are your thoughts on him and some of the, kind of per touch efficiency all-stars that also maybe deal with a little input volatility? I'll toss Jahmyr Gibbs and maybe even Aaron Jones into that mix.
Yeah, no, those are like extremely viable because like we have to understand in the changing dynamics of the NFL game, it also influences like how our DFS players can get to 25 to 30 fantasy points. And for running backs, because there are very few of them that see enough pass volume to like offset the need for multiple touchdowns, that path is 100 yards on the ground plus 2 touchdowns. That's 25 fantasy points right off the bat on DraftKings. Now, there are guys that see like 3-4 weekly targets that offset the need for one of those scores, but they're still going to need to surpass 100 yards. So these efficiency guys, that list that you provided is a really good starting point. These efficiency guys are still valuable, and it goes against like what we're just have drilled in us, like volume wins, just play the volume. It goes against that because we really don't have that like in today's NFL game. The players that do have that are priced at 9K, borderline 10K, like Christian McCaffrey. So those guys are extremely valuable, but we have to realize that like the getting over 100 yards and 2 scores is tough to do. And if that happens on a slate, because scoring is down, because the dynamics of running back is down, because like how running backs are putting up fantasy points is different. If somebody does go for 102 on a slate, they are optimal. You had to have them or you're not winning anything. So that has to be like included in your decision-making process. Like that is within Devon Achane's range of outcomes. He's proven that on 14 touches, on the 12 to 15 opportunities we expect him to get on a weekly basis. That is within Raheem Mostert's range of outcomes because he has a very robust red zone role. So yeah, those guys have to kind of be in our thoughts, our process. And yes, it's less likely that they do that, but it is possible.
I know every situation is different and contextual, but do you have a lean with those kind of bucket of players we just talked about as playing those guys as one-offs or as part of a correlated game environment?
I much rather target guys like that as one-offs because the outlier type game that they have to return. Okay, I'll backtrack a little bit. I much prefer playing those guys in like as a one-off or in a game overstack because those are kind of the two primary paths to that kind of outlier type performance. It's like we saw like in week 2 or 3, whatever it was, Miami against Denver. Like they scored 70 points. Obviously, there's going to be more opportunity for a lot of guys to hit. But the other kind of way that can happen is kind of similar to, I don't know, like the Baltimore Ravens are a good example. So Gus Edwards, 9 freaking touchdowns in 5 weeks. That is directly taking away from Lamar Jackson. That is directly taking away from Mark Andrews. Teams that we know kind of how they behave. It's easier to take a more one-off stance on teams like that because that is now like directly taking away from the expected production of somebody else on their team. And you don't need a team to score 28 plus points to catch that lightning in a bottle. But a team like scoring 3 touchdowns, the 49ers are a good example, like a team just consistently scoring 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, somewhere in that range, can provide only one guy hitting and not a game stack. So those type of teams where we expect like the offense to succeed but not go nuclear, I much prefer to like target these efficiency guys. The 49ers are a great example of that. Like, I much prefer to target them as a one-off or a skinny correlation.
Let's do the Tony Pollard conversation real quick, because I know everyone's been talking about that. We mentioned it before. You said, kind of coming down to ownership. So let me just give you a ballpark, because I do think he's going to come in. Let's say he's like the 7th or 8th most popular. Let's say he's like 15, 16%, small field, single entry, 3 max, high stakes. What are you doing with Tony Pollard at 6,600 at that ownership?
I think you have to have some. And the thought process kind of changes between MME and single entry type stuff. Single entry, we're a little bit more concerned with like 80% outcome. The 80% outcome on a guy like Tony Pollard in this spot, based on the decreased efficiency, and we know that he's kind of being held to 15 to 18 running back opportunities, is much lower than we would want at that price. Large field MME stuff, there's much more latitude to kind of play around with that profile. So it kind of depends on like your goals, your roster construction tendencies, like the contests you're entering. It's all like part of that weird puzzle that we do every week. So I don't know. That was a really nebulous answer to be like, I don't know, like it depends.
Yeah. No, what do you, I'm also seeing some chatter about Rico Dowdle. Is that too galaxy brain? Is he in play here, or is that too thin?
I think it's too thin, because we still, okay. So this kind of like comes into the discussion of like, what does a value play mean? Value is this weird, like, constraint that we place on our minds that says like, and it's kind of tied to like salary multiplier. It's like, okay, yeah, Rico Dowdle, hell yeah, he's 4.6. If he gets me 15 fantasy points, I am cooking. When the first kick happens in a game, salary goes out the window, and all we're concerned about is raw points. So if you back up your process and include that mindset, it's like, I'm never playing Rico Dowdle. He has 0 path to 25 fantasy points. Well, okay. Like it's there. He needs an injury, and it's like a 99th percentile, even with an injury. So like, yeah, it can happen. If we played the slate out 100 times, Rico Dowdle would approach the optimal conversation maybe once and probably 0 times. So yeah, like I'm almost never playing Rico Dowdle. He has a season high of 12 running back opportunities. He is not a Devon Achane that can score 2 touchdowns and put up 100 yards on 12 running back opportunities. He is a straight ahead plower forward type running back, and that is very hard to do. It's like asking Jamal Williams to go put up 100 yards and 2 scores on 12 carries. It's like, it's not going to happen.
Yep. I'm with you on that. One other name I wanted to bring up that I don't think I would have brought up unless I saw the report that Antonio Gibson is listed as doubtful.
Yeah,
Brian Robinson coming off a big game, mainly in the receiving game, which was kind of interesting. Now he's 5,800 going against this Giants squad. I assume some steam is incoming on him with that news, but what's your thoughts on Brian Robinson?
People don't want to accept the fact that Brian Robinson is the only running back this season to have 2 number 1 overall running back performances this year, which is insane. Like, we would have never thought that. I drafted the crap out of Robinson in best ball, but I have not really touched him in DFS. This is very interesting. And the fact that Antonio Gibson is out, we're probably going to see, what's his name? Like Chris, whatever, step into the secondary role. I'm so sick and lack of sleep. I can't remember.
Oh, Chris Rodriguez.
Yeah, Chris Rodriguez. Yeah, there it is. He's probably going to step in, but we should also expect, like Brian Robinson, to see an increase in opportunities. And the most important thing in that discussion is the pass game usage. Do we expect him to stay on the field for more third downs, for more clear passing plays? Because he has like 2 or more targets in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like all but 2 games this season. But 2 targets is not doing enough to like remove the need for 2 touchdowns. What we really need from Brian Robinson is 4, 5, 6 targets to be able to return like a 3 for 30 plus receiving line. And now we still need him to like rush for 100 yards and score. But now that path is much easier to attain if he does have that pass game usage. So yeah, I mean, like with Antonio Gibson, who has been 50% snap rate player. He has been the clear passing down guy. If that's some of that, we just need like some of that. If some of that bleeds over to B-Rob, 100%. And his price is very, very palatable.
Yeah, I'm going to give him a long, hard look this week. Before we move over to wide receiver, want to mention, see a bunch of you guys, YouTube members in the chat. As a reminder, if you guys aren't familiar with that YouTube membership, you get access to 2 premium shows a week. I do a DFS After Dark show on Saturday nights, bring a guest on, get to know them. Had Tom Straken on from the UK on Saturday night, had a great chat with him. This week, I have Roto World's Kyle Dvorak is going to be my guest. Excited to talk with him. That also gets you access to the Sunday morning GPP cram. That's every Sunday, 10:45 a.m. We go over the overnight news, the latest ownership steam, all of that good stuff. Get you ready for the slate. And then you also get the access to the Discord, unlocks the Hand Builders and OptoBro channel in the Discord. We cram for the showdown slates. I've been sharing my pick'em entries in there, all of that good stuff. So pretty good bang for your buck. Become a Hand Builder and OptoBro YouTube member and unlock all of that stuff. Let's move over now, Hilow, to wide receiver here. We have a lot of interesting options at the top end. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra, CeeDee Lamb. We got your guy Stephon Diggs paired with Allen in that game. And then, like you also mentioned, we look like we have massive mega chalk on 3 Cardinals wide receivers. What are your overall thoughts on wide receiver here?
Don't play Cardinals wide receivers. I don't know. I don't understand. Is Rondale Moore's included in that, in a like negative A dot roll, 60% snap rate roll? That's lovely. Just don't do that and you'll be profitable.
Yeah, I'm seeing over in small field, over 20% for all of these guys, with Michael Wilson almost to 30.
Damn. From a matchup and schematic, how do the Cardinals match up here? Michael Wilson it's actually tight end Trey McBride that leads the team in yards per route run, in fantasy points per route run, in every kind of predictive metric that we have against the primary coverages that he's going to see this week. Second is rookie wide receiver Michael Wilson. It's like Marquise Brown has been nails against man coverage, where they're getting an extremely zone heavy matchup. And Marquise Brown is probably going to draw ownership too. It's like his numbers against zone this year have been laughable. So yeah, I mean, like if I'm playing this game, I'm looking at the Houston Texans, and then I'm like bringing it back with just not reinventing the wheel because you don't really care about ownership, and playing the top Cardinals on paper play, which is Trey McBride. But yeah, the Cardinals don't really do it for me this week.
Yeah. And I don't even, like you said, there's like, sometimes there's easy pivots, right? Where if everyone's piling onto Rondale Moore, and then it's like, well, Michael Wilson there's nowhere to hide from the ownership in this thing. And it's like, I guess James Conner, but even that doesn't feel like a fun spot to get to.
No, I mean, the Cardinals running backs as a whole, like all of James Conner plus Mari DeMarcado was out. So Keontae Ingram and Tony Jones was the third running back last week. They combined for 0 targets, which is telling in who Kyler Murray is and how this offense is going to run. If Kyler is not getting, or at least in that one game sample, and when you pair it with what we saw last season, it kind of becomes more predictive. He's not getting like called runs anymore. He's not that running back. And we saw it happen last season. We saw it last week, where his rushing production is coming from escapes, which he's always going to have the upside for. He's more like Patrick Mahomes than he is like Justin Fields now. He's able to escape the pocket, extend plays. He's able to get his eyes downfield. And when he gets his eyes downfield, his first instinct is to run. It's not to look for his third, fourth option in the flat. It's to run. So that's naturally going to lead to a lower running back target rate. James Conner is almost completely off my radar here.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let's talk about some wide receivers that are interesting to you. I feel like we've talked a little bit about Lamb. I assume Diggs kind of goes in conjunction with your Josh Allen love.
Yeah, if you're playing Josh Allen, it almost has to be paired with Diggs. You can add to that Dalton Kincaid. You can add Gabe Davis to that. But I would not play Allen without Diggs because of his red zone role.
Yep. What about some other guys on the high end? Amon-Ra St. Brown and Cooper Kupp both are pretty intriguing to me. What do you think about those guys?
It's actually like, if looking at the list of guys at 7K and above, it's actually Brandon Ayuk and Puka Nacua that are most
Okay.
interesting to me. Um, we look at how Puka has won this year. Insane target rate against zone coverage with Cooper Kupp out, 34% targets per route run against zone without Cooper Kupp to start the season. But with Cooper Kupp back, it's dropped all the way down to 32%. So it barely has been knocked at all. So he's still seeing targets at a high rate against zone. That's important because Seattle's in zone at the second highest rate in the league. We know they run all kinds of too high. They run cover 2, they run cover 3. So we expect Puka to kind of lead this team in targets in this spot. And like, yeah, Cooper Kupp is Cooper Kupp. He can win in anything. But Stafford's like primary read against zone coverage has been Puka. The other guy there, Brandon Ayuk, a downfield type, highly efficient wide receiver against an extreme pass funnel defense, is something that I want to be kind of looking at. And when you get into like the deeper layers of pricing psychology, I'm going to nerd out for a little bit, and like look at how frequently a nameless player would be played if they were priced at 8K versus 7K. The 8K player without a name would be played at a higher rate just because there's pricing psychology that goes into that. So that kind of naturally leads to this like kind of nebulous range in wide receiver pricing, like between 7,300 to like 6,500. Typically those players are underplayed because they're a little bit harder to get to. You don't feel comfortable clicking them. It's like, oh, I'd rather pay the extra 600 to get up to a guy priced at 7.9, when it's like, well, these guys carry just as much upside, but they're like, if you remove the name, they're going to be way lower owned. So that's just kind of always in the back of my mind, I think, when I'm building, is like, how is the field going to react to where this player is priced at? And I don't get the feeling they're going to be excited to play either of those guys this week.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I saw a similar psychological thing play out in best ball too, right? Where you look at stacks and like you would look at the stack percentage for Kirk Cousins, and so many of them have Justin Jefferson because people want to have that main guy. Where if you just looked at like Hawkinson and Addison stacks with Kirk, they were far lower just because there is this like psychological thing like, hey, if I'm making a bet on Kirk Cousins, like I need the top dog with him.
Yeah. And this exploration kind of into like the psychological aspects kind of was introduced to me through game theory in showdowns, because it's extremely important in showdowns where like you want to click the top options on each team. You're like, I'll build around this. I want the top options. It's like, well, look at the hit rates of those guys. And it's across the league, it's like 30%. So the numbers don't add up here. Anyway, yeah. Nerding.
How about this situation? Speaking of kind of two high-end wide receivers, different price discrepancies, different ownership. You got Tyreek Hill at 9,300. Looks like he's going to be fairly popular. But then you got Jalen Waddle at 7,600. Everyone's like, I don't know if I want to play 7,600 for second fiddle. What do you think about these guys?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion because Tyreek Hill just kind of so far and away separated from Jalen Waddle this season. It's kind of similar to what we saw last year with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, where they went into the season last year like these guys are kind of on par. They're kind of on par from underlying metrics. And then like last year, Jamar Chase just like left T. Higgins in the dust. Kind of same thing for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But like Jalen Waddle's presence is so important for like what this offense can do to put stress on an opposing defense. So like his presence is like really, really viable and valuable to this team, but it's more so like what his presence means for the upside of Tyreek Hill kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other wide receivers that we should mention here. You
Adam
mentioned
Thielen,
Puka.
I'll throw it out.
Yeah. Talk about Adam Thielen. He's an interesting one.
Adam Thielen has seen a 33.3% targets per route run rate against man coverage this season. And he's getting a matchup with a Dallas defense that runs man coverage at the second highest rate in the league, around 30%. Also, 3 out of 6 games with Frank Reich calling plays to begin the season, Adam Thielen went for 30 plus DK points. He only hit 15.2 DK points was his peak win the 3 games with Thomas, whoever the offensive coordinator is, I forgot his name, in Carolina calling plays. So and Frank Reich is taking back control of the offense this week. So that's why that's important. So we get kind of everything coming together here. The matchup favors Thielen. The coaching tendencies kind of favor Thielen. And I think he's going to go largely overlooked in this spot.
Yeah. Guys, chat, I see the news. I know that Joe Burrow is out for the season. It's a bummer. It sucks. This is a week 11 DFS show, okay? If you want to go read takes about Joe Burrow being out for the season, head over to X. I want to talk about
It's
this.
not good.
It's not good. It sucks, but
it's not good for Joe Burrow's fantasy outlook, guys.
What other pass game I want to ask you about, because it seemed like receivers on both sides were in good spots, and because they haven't been lighting it up, I don't think they're going to be too popular. That'd be the Jags and the Titans. I have some interest in DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk. Any love for those guys, that game environment, anything there?
I don't. And the reason is you're getting 2 immovable objects kind of facing off, because what we've seen under Doug Peterson and his time in Jacksonville, you look all the way back to the beginning of last season, is he is going to want to utilize a very, very run balanced split in pass and rush rate, unless otherwise forced to do so. And because Jacksonville has such a strong run defense, and because Tennessee is not likely to move away from Derrick Henry unless forced to do so, you kind of have these 2 immovable objects kind of butting heads. There's no spark here. Like, yeah, a spark could be like a punt return for a touchdown, something really, really variant like that. But from like a what is likeliest to happen scenario here, it's that like the spark isn't there, because Tennessee, you look at like Derrick Henry's utilization over the previous 3 seasons even, and he is most valuable when the game remains close. It's not the opponent. It's not the rushing matchup. It's just how much volume do we expect him to get? And he's going to get volume in games that are close. That's just how they run their team. So like if this game remains close, Derrick Henry's going to see a ton of volume. If Derrick Henry sees a ton of volume in a difficult matchup, that kind of mutes the game environment. And it's like Doug Peterson's on the other side. He's not going to be pushing things on his own either. So like there are paths, just because these are 2 pass funnel defenses, but it's kind of missing that spark to ignite something here.
That makes a ton of sense to me. Generally what JM and I do is we kind of mash up the tight end conversation with the lineup build here. But let's just do a real quick high level on tight end. You mentioned McBride, along with all those Cardinals guy, is going to be overwhelmingly popular. It seems like Evan Ingram, Cole Kmet going to be the other preferred choices there, all down in that sub or in that 4,300 range. What are your thoughts on tight end? Generally, I'm correlating with my QB. I'm trying not to eat one off chalk. I don't know how much there is to say.
Yeah, that's a good game plan. If you just like correlate with your game environment or your QB at tight end, that's going to be a prevailingly plus EV endeavor. The other thing is don't play Evan Ingram. It's just that simple on the slate. He is a low ADOT role. He has he has like 3 red zone targets this year, something like insanely stupidly low, with 0 end zone targets. It's very, very difficult for that profile to return GPP upside. So Sam Laporta, George Kittle, Dalton Kincaid, we talked about Jake Ferguson. We kind of talked about Trey McBride. Those are kind of the guys that I'm looking at on the slate.
Yeah, I'll just mention, I think Laporta right now is my favorite. I know you have to pay up to 5,800, but seeing him at sub 5%, when I just think like in a vacuum, he's the best tight end play, and you're not having to play, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, prices for that. Really good environment there. I'm pretty interested in Laporta, but let's transition now to build a lineup here with JM. Damn it, I said out of habit, JM. Build
That's
a
all right,
lineup
man.
with Hilow.
I was like, JM's
Goodness.
here. Oh my God, I know him.
We by the way, we do have the Deposit Kingdom rake free tournament as always going 420, very chill number of entries. We're at 282 right now. This has been filling by Saturday. So if you're watching this on delay, this is posted exclusively in the Deposit Kingdom channel. It is a rake free league, $10 entry, and I review the winning lineups on the Monday portfolio review. Hop in the Discord, check the announcements section. That's the only place you can get this. All right, Hilow, like I normally do with JM, kind of open canvas here, whichever direction, game stack, skinny stack, one-off play. Where do you want to start us?
Yeah, so let's go the poster boy, man.
Yeah.
I haven't messed around with this too much, so I'm kind of interested to see how things fall into place. Yeah, let's go Josh Allen, Diggs, and I'm
Do you do
debating the
Kincaid?
direction. I'm debating the direction whether it's Kincaid or whether it's Gabe. I think in this spot, it's probably most upside is with Gabe. Let's go Gabe.
All right. All right, Gabe Davis. There we go. Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, Gabe Davis. So then normally the question I always ask Jam, and I have a feeling I know your answer. You got two explosive guys on the other side, but they're bogged down by awful quarterback play. Any love for Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson speeding up this game?
No.
Easy answer.
In
there.
and out, baby.
Yep. Buffalo at home. We already kind of talked about it in the Josh Allen section, so I don't think we need to belabor this anymore there. Where's the next direction we go here?
I think there's three spots that kind of jump off the page, and they're kind of in this middle tier of player pricing because we kind of need a little bit of savings here.
Yeah.
The first is Trey McBride. Playing this Buffalo overstack in this spot, you don't have to worry about the ownership on Trey McBride, and that's kind of why I went to Davis instead of Dalton Kincaid, because we can still play like a good on paper guy. In that same game environment, you got to just throw in Tank Dell because, again, we're not really worried about ownership at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the combined, Josh Allen probably is going to be what, like 3%. Steph Diggs at 9,100 is going to be like 3 or 4%. I mean, it seems like you're just automatically hyper unique with that stack.
Yeah, 100%. So we really don't have to worry about what's going on the rest. We might run out of salary here, but we'll see what happens. Obviously, we can move Tank Dell to a guy like Devin Singletary, save a few bucks that way. But let's throw in Brian Robinson and see what that leaves us.
We got 3,700 remaining. If we want to get a defense in, that might give us a better idea.
Yeah, it's going to be tight. Let's go.
I don't even hate the Packers at home versus Justin Herbert at Lambeau for a cheap one.
Yeah, another
Rams versus Seattle. I could see being one there with how much they've struggled. Anything else jump out to you?
Not really. It's tough now that I look at here because what we're looking at, like, we want some semblance of the possibility for pressure in a backfield, and kind of all these like pay down options this week are up against offensive lines that are above average to very, very good, like the Bears, the Packers, the Panthers, the Chargers, the Cowboys, and the Lions are like three of the top offensive lines in the league this year. So even like the Buccaneers, same thing with San Francisco. So let's just plug the Rams in or the Titans, either one of those.
That gives us 4,150. We might have to do the tank to Singletary.
Yeah, it's going to depend on, well, I mean, Singletary would leave us 3K bare minimum. So we don't have much here to play with.
If we come off of tank, then you're at least in the 44 range.
Yeah, but it's easier to find the value at wide receiver. So let's do that. Let's do that. Now, let's see here. How much do we have per?
4,450. So you could, we could middle it and go like 4 and a 5K, or we could live in the 4,500 range. Or if there is a punt.
Let's, what does DJ Moore give us?
That's an interesting one. How much is
43?
He's 33. Yeah.
Is there anything down here?
You could play Jamison Williams opposite DJ Moore.
Ooh, doggy. Now we're getting into it.
Yeah.
Getting into the
It's
thick of it
or
here.
you could double up without Fields and play Mooney with
Oh,
DJ
check it out,
Moore.
dude. Oh my god, it's so gross, but it's kind of could be so. Darius Slayton, man, against Washington.
Y-
That could be
I
something. It's
is it
correlated.
I was looking at the his matchup. It actually looks pretty good. And is Jalen Hyatt gonna miss?
I don't know, honestly. I didn't write that game up. I haven't been following it too close.
I know he was missing some practices.
Yeah, he got
I mean,
dinged up last week. Oh, he's concussion, dude. Yeah, he's out. He's not
yeah.
playing.
So you have it's one of those things, right? Where we've been picking on the Commander secondary all season, but now that it's Tommy
Yeah.
DeVito, everyone's like, yeah, I'm not doing this. But the other thing that was interesting about them, I was listening to Pat Crane's walkthrough, and Tommy DeVito was actually like even at pass rate relative to expectation, where they were actually letting him chuck it that entire second half in a negative game script. Like they weren't just rolling over and running the ball a million times. So like bad secondary, Tommy DeVito chucking it the second half, and then you play it opposite of a Brian Robinson positive game script. You can sell me on that.
Yeah. We also have like 100 if we want to move up to the Titans defense.
Okay.
Potential.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. This is a fun team. This one, like because this is the other thing too for, I always like to think about, what size contest would you ideally toss this roster in? Like if you could engineer it for a perfect contest.
I think this is best suited for a more small field type contest, but I don't think that it is out of the realm of possibility in a large field. It's actually it's in this like weird nebulous range for MME, I would say, for large field stuff where it feels a little over correlated for those type of field sizes. But I don't think you can say like with high degree of certainty, like it'll perform better in one or the other.
Yeah.
I would my governing like feeling is that it's best suited for a smaller field thing.
Yeah. And I mean, like just looking at it from an ownership standpoint, I mean, Singletary's going to be popular. McBride's going to be popular. Brian Robinson is going to catch some steam. Other than that, I think all of these plays are going to be very low owned.
Yeah. And you look at like DJ Moore, 100 yards receiving in 3 out of 5 fully healthy Justin Fields games. He's up against a pass funnel Detroit Lions defense. He's probably going to go largely overlooked this week. And just from like a roster construction standpoint, like having the 2 running backs below 6K is going to be highly unique on this slate.
Yep. I'll do my usual caveat. I say it every week and I will continue to say it because I continue to get comments that don't seem to feel like people are internalizing this. This is a practice build. This does not mean that Hilow thinks only Josh Allen stacks are viable. In fact, he talked about liking Brock Purdy and CJ Stroud. There's lots of ways to attack it. This was a thought experiment. What would a Josh Allen roster look like? We went down that path. This is what we came up with. Use these ideas, make your own practice builds, consume the information, consume the latest news, make your own lineups before lock. Check out OWS to get all of the updated thoughts from Hilow, JM, and the rest of their crew. Hilow, really appreciate you battling through some sickness, doing a lot of shows today. Really appreciate you filling in for JM.
Yeah, man, we battle. Appreciate you having me on, dude.
Yeah, of course. As always, guys, reminder, head over to 1 Week Season. So much great stuff over there. Pete 50 will get you 50% off your rest of season Inner Circle and OWS DFS subs. Immediately following this show, as in right now, I'm heading over to the Badge Bros channel. We're going to walk through this slate from an underdog perspective, talk the 6-person drafts, 12-person. We'll build some pick'em entries. I believe if you just refresh your screen here in the next few seconds, you will automatically be ported over there, and then we will continue chopping this up from an underdog angle. Thank you again to Hilow. Also, one other plug for Hilow. Check out his show with Rich Rebar, one of my favorites every week, Searching for Ceiling. I saw my guy Clay in the chat giving that recommendation earlier as well. Very good compliment to this show as well. So have a great week. Go check us out over on the Badge Bros. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Hilow.